on your website, The Happiness of Being, Michael, you
Yes.
say that the term Atma-vichara really means self-investigation, self-examination, or self-scrutiny. And it denotes the simple practice of closely examining, inspecting, or scrutinizing our fundamental and essential consciousness of our own being, I am, with a keen and concentrated power of attention. So, my question is, when I get to I am, often I don't want to ask any questions because the feeling of I or amness feels deep and blissful. I'm wondering, what am I at that point examining, inspecting, or scrutinizing? Because it feels if I have to do that, I have to use my mind, which ejects me from the deep feeling of bliss. So, is that bliss that I feel in the feeling of I or the amness, is that just a doorway to greater depth? And how do I open that door and go deeper?
Right. This is a very good question. Um, Perhaps the way I expressed it is not the best way of expressing it, but it is difficult to express these things in words because whatever words we use, they will be understood differently by different people. So, what the term vichara or the equivalent Tamil term nata means is investigation, but not investigation in the sense of asking questions. I mean, generally, investigation. Uh, but that's the reason why generally I prefer not to use the term self-inquiry, because self-inquiry, the term inquiry, it can mean investigation. It can also mean asking questions. Even in an investigation, there can be questioning, but that's not the main aspect of the investigation. The basic tool of any investigation is observation. Supposing a, a zoologist wants to study the behavior of a certain bird or animal or whatever, what do? They just observe it. They may have cameras that will work in the dark or that will be triggered whenever there's any movement or whatever. But whatever instruments they use, the basic means of investigation is observation. It's the same in any investigation. The basic tool is observation. So it means investigation in the sense of observation. But so when we investigate anything other than ourselves, our attention has to go away from ourselves towards that thing. In the case of self-investigation, there are not two things. There's only one thing. So, as Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadēśa Undiyār, knowing oneself is being oneself alone is knowing oneself. Likewise, the same applies to investigation. We can investigate ourselves or we can observe what we are only by being ourselves. So it is not actually an action. It is a state of just being. But why the observation or investigation aspect of it is emphasized? In many types of meditation, people are just trying to calm down the mind. They're trying to make the mind quiet. The problem with such meditation is one very easily slips into sleep or some other state of manolaya, even if it's called nirvikalpa samadhi or whatever. It's just a state of manolaya. That means a state of temporary dissolution of the mind. Obviously, when we're in manolaya, we can't do any practice. But so we need to avoid manolaya, even if it's given a fancy name of nirvikalpa samadhi, it's still manolaya. So we need to be alert, but not alert to anything that is happening or to any phenomena. We need to be alert to our own being. So it is that being being attentively self-aware, that is, we are always self-aware. There is never a moment when we are not aware of ourselves as I am. But generally, because of our interest in things other than ourselves, we overlook the basic awareness I am and take interest only in other things. So though that the background of self-awareness, I am, is always there, we neglect it because of our interest in other things. So what we, in this practice of self-investigation, we are trying to be attentively self-aware. That is, instead of allowing our attention to go out towards anything else, we are trying to attend only to ourselves, to observe what is this I am, what is this being. It's not a mental activity. There's no need to ask any questions or to think any thoughts. It's just to observe what it is just to be I am. Even these words will be inadequate. Whatever words may be used will be inadequate. Bhagavan has explained it in various different ways, but words are, as he said, the real teaching is only silence, because the words can at best be pointers. So in order to understand Bhagavan's words, we need to try to put it into practice. The more we put it into practice, the clearer the meaning of his words will become. That's the earlier part of your question. Then regarding what you say, is that bliss just a doorway to a greater depth? Yeah. Yes, it is in a sense, yes. That is, when our mind is going outwards, the greater the vigor with which the mind is going outwards, the more we are overlooking our real nature, which is perfect happiness. So when the mind is much agitated and going outwards, that makes us feel dissatisfied, unhappy, whatever, because we are turning away from the happiness which is our own real nature. The more we turn within, and the mind thereby calms down, the more the happiness which is our own real nature begins to shine forth. So the blissful feeling you feel, the peaceful and blissful feeling you feel when attending to I am, that is an inkling of the infinite happiness that you actually are. Why is it only an inkling, not the full thing? Because we haven't yet turned a full 180 degrees. Obviously, we are not literally turning 180 degrees, but metaphorically, now when we're attending to anything other than ourselves, whether anything we perceive through the five senses or anything we perceive within the mind, the thoughts, the feelings, emotions, memories, all these things, whatever it is, all these, according to Bhagavan, are external to us. They're all other than ourselves. So long as we are attending to anything other than ourselves, we are, so to speak, turned 180 degrees away from ourselves towards other things. Now we are trying to turn back 180 degrees towards ourselves. The more we turn towards ourselves, the more other things will recede into the background in our awareness. But because we still have attachment to other things, because we still have Vishaya vasanas, which is a technical term used by Bhagavan. Vishaya means phenomena, vasana means inclination. So we have that inclination to experience phenomena. That is what Vishaya vasana means. The Vishaya vasanas are the seeds of all our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. And they're also the seeds, a grosser manifestation of the Vishaya vasanas is this whole world. Bhagavan said the whole world is nothing but a projection of our vasanas. So this external world is a gross manifestation of our vasanas. The subtler manifestation of our vasanas is the likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on, and fears and everything. So because we still have strong Vishaya vasanas, we still have a strong inclination to be aware of other things, when we try to turn within, we are not turning the full 180 degrees, depending on the strength of our bhakti, that's our love to be aware of ourself alone, and the corresponding strength of our vairagya, which is the freedom from desire or passion to attend to other things, that to that extent we are able to turn within. So when we talk about going deep within, it means we are turning our attention more closely or more keenly towards ourselves, and thereby withdrawing our attention from other things. So the depth with which we go within, if we want, and obviously we can't measure it, but if you want to have a scale by which you measure it, we can measure it on a scale of 180 degrees. So we begin by telling maybe just 10 degrees, 20 degrees. We're slightly more attentive to ourselves than we normally are. But as we go deeper and deeper in the practice, we're turning 40 degrees, 60 degrees, 90 degrees, 120 degrees, 140 degrees. Even we may turn up to 179 or 179.5 degrees. But so long as we haven't turned the full 180 degrees, there's still a lingering awareness of phenomena. And so long as there's a lingering awareness of phenomena, what is aware of phenomena is only ego. So ego is still present. It's only when we turn the full 180 degrees to face ourselves alone, but we thereby, so to speak, turn our back on all phenomena and are aware only of ourselves. When we're aware only of ourselves, then only do we experience ourselves as pure awareness, which is our real nature. Because what pure awareness means is simple awareness, not awareness of anything, but just awareness. That is awareness that is devoid of awareness of other things. So that is pure awareness. So that is what we are trying to experience when we're investigating ourselves. That is, we don't have to be thinking it in these terms. All we need to be, we're trying to be aware of ourselves. But the more keenly and deeply we're aware of ourselves, the closer we come to that state of pure awareness in which we cease to be aware of anything else. So, as I say, these are just words. These are just pointers. We can understand the meaning of these words only to the extent to which we put them into practice. So Bhagavan has given us lots of pointers. They're all pointing in the same direction. Bhagavan hasn't. There's not more than one way of practicing self-investigation. But Bhagavan has described it in many ways. Has given various clues to help us to feel what is this, to get the hang of self-attentiveness, of what it actually is. And then we discover it, there's nothing more to know. As Bhagavan said, actually, there is nothing for us to know which we do not already know. We already know ourselves. The problem is that all we have to know is I am. But the problem is now, though we know I am, we don't know just I am. We know I am so-and-so. I am Michael, or I am Mana, or whoever. And consequently, we know so many other things. What is called Atma-vichara, or Atma-vichara, the true knowledge of ourself, is nothing but the mere awareness I am, bereft of all adjuncts. So to be aware of I am and nothing other than I am, that is the state of pure awareness. That is what we experience every day in sleep. Now though we can recognize that we were aware in sleep, we are not able to clearly recollect what we were aware. That is, we are aware that we were aware in sleep, but we're not clearly aware of exactly what we were aware of in sleep. Why is that? Because what we are aware of in sleep is our real nature, the pure I am. Even now we're aware of that, but instead of being aware of it as it is, we're aware of it as I am so-and-so. So we're always aware that I am. We're not aware what I am. Why are we not aware of what I am? Because we're aware of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. So our aim is just to be aware I am. So as Bhagavan said, it's not a new knowledge to be attained. It's just a matter of shedding all the false knowledge. When all the false knowledge is shed, what remains, that is the real knowledge, the pure awareness. What we gain as we go deeper in this practice, what we gain is not more information. What we gain is greater clarity of self-awareness. That clarity of self-awareness, because it is relatively new compared to that, we're always self-aware, but as we turn within more and more, we get more and more clarity of self-awareness. That clarity of self-awareness is what Bhagavan sometimes described as spuripu or spurana, which is a term that occurs in various books, and people make a big mystery of it. Have you experienced spurana? As if it's a thing to experience. There's no thing called spurana. Spurana is just, it's not an object of awareness, it's a quality of awareness. It's a quality of self-awareness, a clarity of self-awareness. So that's all that Bhagavan means by spurana or spuripu. That is exactly that clarity. So that is what we gain more of as we go deeper. There's a greater degree of clarity, and the more clarity there is, the clearer the way becomes. So it's a snowballing process. We all start off with small baby steps, because when we start on this path, we all still have very strong Vishaya vasanas, and to wean our mind off its Vishaya vasanas takes patient and persistent practice. And it's only by perseverance that we can slowly wean our mind off its Vishaya vasanas. How do we wean them off the Vishaya? How do we wean the mind off its Vishaya vasanas? By turning within more and more, because the Vishaya vasanas are what draw our mind outwards. The more we turn our mind within, the more the Satvasana, that's the inclination to turn within and just be as we are, that, as you say, you feel that bliss, that blissful state when you're attending only to I am. That blissful state is increasing your inclination just to be as you are. That is what is called Satvasana. It's the same as what is also called Swatma Bhakti, the love for one's own real nature or one's own real self. By persevering in this practice, we are slowly weaning our mind off its Vishaya vasanas and cultivating the Satvasana. That is, the Vishaya vasanas are growing weaker, the Satvasana is growing stronger. That is accompanied by, as I say, a greater degree of clarity. Because the clarity comes to the extent to which we turn within, to that extent do we gain clarity. And the more clarity we get, the clearer Bhagavan's teachings will become. I mean, I think anyone who has been studying and practicing Bhagavan's teachings for some years will recognize that what we understood a few years ago, we understood to some extent, but now we understand more clearly, more deeply what Bhagavan is saying. And that increase in that depth and clarity of understanding accompanies our going deeper into the practice. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yes, it does, Michael.
Okay, yeah. No, I just see, you say, how do I open that door? Well, the door through which we came out is ego, and the door through which we have to go back is ego. So it's by attending to ego, that is this awareness I, this fundamental awareness I, but by attending to that, that is the doorway. Bhagavan often used to say, go back the way you came. The way we came is we rose as ego. Now we've got this ego which has led us out to the world. We now have to follow the ego back to its source, which is ourself. Actually, it's not, though Bhagavan sometimes talks of it as tracing the ego back to its source, and he used the analogy of a dog following the master's scent. these are all ways of explaining it, but we have to take all these analogies with a pinch of salt, because of course the source from which we rose is ourselves. So it's not something far away, but by attending to this ego, the more we attend to ego, the more it subsides, and the closer we come back, we come to being the source that we actually are. Yes, you were just saying something when I interrupted you, sorry.
No problem. I was just going to say you are right that over time we understand Bhagavan's teachings better, because all of us have read in Nāṉ Ār, he says, when the world is seen, the self is not seen.
Yeah.
And when the self is seen, the world is not seen. But I didn't get that, what that really meant until recently, which is what you're saying, that until you see the ego and the phenomena, you haven't really turned, it's not 180 degrees.
Until we completely cease being aware of phenomena, even the slightest trace of the subtlest phenomena, until that awareness of phenomena ceases entirely, we have not turned the full 180 degrees. But we have to turn the full 180 degrees just for one split second, because as soon as you've turned, that is the moment at which ego is destroyed, and then there's no going back.
That sounds wonderful.
It does sound wonderful, but if we're honest with ourselves, when we try to put it into practice, we still have this desire and attachment for other things. That is why we're still struggling to turn the full 180 degrees, because we're not yet willing to let go of everything. We're not yet willing to surrender ourselves entirely. Surrender ourselves means surrender this ego, all that we now take ourselves to be.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael, our next question comes from David Roberts. David, would you please read your question to Michael?
Hello, everyone, and hello, Michael. My question has to do with self-inquiry and meditation.
Right.
In Paul Brunton's book, A Search in Secret India, Ramana is asked about balancing daily meditation with the demands of everyday life, work, family obligations, etc. He says, the life of action need not be renounced. If you meditate for an hour or two every day, you can then carry on with your duties. If you meditate in the right manner, then the current of mind induced will continue to flow even in the midst of your work. And so my question is, what do you think Ramana means exactly when he says meditate in the right manner?
That is, this may not be the exact words Bhagavan said, because Bhagavan would have said in Tamil and it's been translated, but that is generally Bhagavan. I think more likely Bhagavan would have said, if you meditate for a while every day, rather than an hour or two, because Bhagavan never prescribed any length of time. But he did explain often. The practice should go on as much as possible throughout the day. But obviously, when we're engaged in other activities, we cannot go very, or it seems at first, but we cannot go very deep within, because it seems to us necessary to attend to other things. So, but even when we're in the midst of other work, other activities, we can to some extent be holding on to what he sometimes calls a tenuous current or a flow of self-attentiveness. That is, that self-attentiveness can be there in the background, even in the midst of other activities. But there are times when our mind isn't, when we're not engaged in other activities, when we're able to go a bit deeper within. That may be the time. I mean, we may, depending on our lifestyle and our other obligations, we may have some time every day, but we are able to sit quietly, whether in a comfortable chair or even lying on the bed, it doesn't matter. The posture doesn't matter. Someplace where we're free of distractions and we try to go deeper within. What Bhagavan said is, the more you go deep within at such times, that will help you to maintain to hold on to that current of self-attentiveness, even in the midst of other activities. And the more you hold on to self-attentiveness in the midst of other activities, the more you'll be able to go deep within when you're free of other activities. So the two go hand in hand. Going deep, when we go deep, often we're not able to go deep for very long, because the strength of our Vishayabhasana, if you've got a big beach ball and you try to push it into the sea, you're able to push it down a little and hold it steady there. But if you try and push it down right under the water, the further you push it down, the more the pressure there is for it to come up. So you try to push it down, it slips up this way. Then you try to stop it going that way, and it jumps up this way. So such is the nature of mind or ego. The deeper within we go, the more urge we feel to come out again, because we're not ready to let go. We still have strong Vishayavasanas. So it's our reluctance to surrender ourselves completely that gives us that urge. So the deeper we go, the more pressure there is to come out. So often when we're going deep, we may only be able to go deep for, or at least relatively deep, for just a few moments. It doesn't matter. That is, going deep is beneficial, even if it's only for a few moments. But in the midst of other activities, holding on to that tenuous current, the tenuous current of self-attentiveness, we may be turning only 5 or 10 degrees, but by holding on to that 5 or 10 degrees, that is very beneficial. And that will enable us to go deeper when we are free of other activities. And when we go deeper at those times, that helps us to hold on to it tenuously at other times. So the two go hand in hand. Does that answer the main part of your question adequately?
Thank you. Yes, Michael. And I think really you answered the earlier part of my question with Mana's question, which really also had to do with the nature of meditation.
Yes, yes.
So thank you.
Yes, when Bhagavan said meditate in the right manner, the only manner in which Bhagavan recommended we meditate is he meditate on yourself. Don't meditate on other things. Bhagavan, if people were inclined to do other practices, if people came and said, Bhagavan, I'm doing such and such a puja, or I'm doing such and such a japa, or such and such a meditation, is it good? Bhagavan said, oh yes, it's good. But if people come to Bhagavan and say, I've done so much puja, I've done so much japa, I've done so much dhyana, meditation, I'm not getting any benefit from it, then he will push them deeper. Then he'll say, who is wanting any benefit? Who is it who feels they haven't got benefit? Who was it who was doing the japa? Who was doing? So he turns our attention back towards ourselves, because the most beneficial of all types of meditation is meditating on nothing other than ourselves. So that would have been what Bhagavan meant by meditating in the right manner, turning our attention back towards ourselves.
Yes. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you.
And the other thing about when Bhagavan said the life of action need not be renounced, this was something that he was often asked about. Bhagavan never recommended external renunciation. He also didn't say it's wrong. What he said is, just like marriage or whatever, that all our entire outward life, it is already planned by destiny. So for some people, it's the destiny to get married, to have a job, and to have to work for, and have children, and have to work to maintain the family, and so on. For other people, it's their destiny to become a monk or a nun or a sannyasi or whatever, a nun or whatever. So all these are according to prarabdha. But you can become a monk or a sannyasi or whatever. You can do the formal external renunciation, but still have lots of desires and attachments in your heart. You can go and sit in a cave in the Himalayas, but your mind comes with you. All your desires and attachments, everything comes with you. So Bhagavan, in Bhagavan's view, there's relatively little use in this external forms of renunciation. Of course, if it's our destiny, that is what is good for us. If it's our destiny to renounce, that is good for us. If it's our destiny to live a life of worldly activity with a family and all these things, that is what is good for us. That is, our destiny is tailor-made to suit our present level of spiritual development, to help us progress in the spiritual path. So merely the external renunciation is not the real renunciation. What we need to renounce, the inclination to go outwards, that is the Vishaya Vasana, those we need to renounce, but we cannot renounce them fully without renouncing their root, which is ego. So that is the true renunciation, is only that inward renunciation. First, weaning our mind off its Vishaya Vasanas, weakening the Vishaya Vasanas, and thereby eventually surrendering this ego. Because so long as the Vishaya Vasanas are strong, we cannot turn the full 180 degrees. And without turning the full 180 degrees, we cannot surrender this ego fully. So it's Bhagavan's path is an internal path. Bhagavan never attached importance to external things. He didn't attach importance to rituals. If people wanted to do rituals, that is rituals, they built a temple over his mother's samadhi, over her tomb, and they were doing pujas there. And they later even installed a Sri Chakra, which is some form of tantric worship, and they did that. Bhagavan didn't object to all. For Bhagavan, this is all child's play. If the children want to play, let them play. But that is not the path Bhagavan has shown us. The path Bhagavan has shown us is turning within and inward, the path of inward renunciation. That it's up to each one of us to what extent are we willing to surrender ourselves? Are we willing to truly follow the path that he has shown us? He will not force anyone. There's no use in forcing someone. That is, you cannot be forced to surrender. Surrender is surrender only when it's done wholeheartedly. So we need to our willingness is required. That's why in the old versions of Nāṉ Ār, of Who Am I, there's one of the questions one of the answers Bhagavan gives to one of the questions asked by Shiva Prakasham Pillai. Bhagavan says, God or Guru can only show the way to liberation. They cannot themselves give liberation. Later, when Bhagavan wrote it as an essay, he omitted that sentence because it potentially could be discouraging. But there's a reason he said like that. Why did he say that they cannot? Because God and Guru will never force us to know ourselves until we are willing to surrender ourselves. So though everything is being done by grace, grace is not something that works externally. Grace works from within, giving us that love to turn within and surrender ourselves. So our part is necessary. In the 12th paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, he says, God and Guru are not different. Just like what has been caught in the jaws of a tiger cannot escape, so those who have been caught in the glance of Guru's grace will surely be saved by him and will never be forsaken. However, it is necessary to follow unfailingly the path shown by Guru. So we do have a role to play. It's not that we have to do anything. We have to be willing to surrender. How do we cultivate that willingness to surrender ourselves? By this practice of self-investigation. So that we have to play our part. But it's all being done by Bhagavan, but we have to cooperate.
Thank you, Michael, for taking the question and for giving such a fulsome reply. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Our next question comes from Ravi, and after Ravi, Ted will be up. So Ravi, will you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
I guess to some extent you answered that question. The reason I had asked, the question I have is really, whenever we are in deep meditation and we come out of it, there's always a strong desire to go back to it. And you know, what I've found is that you get detached from the world. And to some extent, Mana, the question that Mana raised helped me to understand that we still have to go deeper and deeper. But I was also wondering if this wanting to go back to that state is really an addiction rather than a state of on the way to the progress to the end reality.
If it is an addiction, it's a very good addiction. we are now addicted to going outwards, to thinking of things other than ourselves. So in order to remove this poisonous addiction to other things, we need to cultivate this addiction to self-attentiveness. In other words, yes, if we're addicted to this, that's so much the better. That addiction to turning within and being self-attentive is what is called Satvasana or Swatma Bhakti. Without that, we will never attain the goal we are seeking. We must have that all-consuming love for just knowing and being ourselves as we actually are.
Thank you very much.
And regarding the earlier part of what you have written was, in deep meditation, the awareness is beyond time and space. It is only relatively so. That is, so long as ego is there, we still experience ourselves as this body. This body doesn't mean just the stula sarira, the physical body. As Bhagavan said, in verse 5 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, Udu Panchakosa Uru. The body is a form of 5 sheaths. That means when Bhagavan talks about ego being the false awareness, I am this body, what he means by body is not just the physical form, all the 5 sheaths. That is, in simple terms, the physical form, the life, the mind, that's the grosser functions of the mind, the intellect, and the will. These are the 5 sheaths. So we don't experience each of these separately. We experience them collectively as the person that we take ourselves to be. So when you're aware of yourself as I am Rani, you're not only Rani is the name given to a particular body, but you're not experiencing that body in isolation from the life that's animating it, or the mind, or the intellect, or the will. You experience them all as one bundle, and all these you experience as I. So long as there's we rise as ego, we are aware of ourselves as this bundle of 5 sheaths, to a greater or lesser extent, and therefore we are caught up in time and space. So people say, I was in deep meditation for 20 minutes. I wasn't aware of the passing of time. Yes, we may not be aware of the passing of time, but we still come, when we come out, we say it lasted 20 minutes. So there is still a tenuous awareness of time and a tenuous awareness of space. But the deeper we go, the more. Time and space is just phenomena. They're very basic phenomena because all other phenomena appear within time and space. There's a framework in which phenomena appear. But the deeper we go, the more all phenomena, including time and space, recede into the background of our awareness, so to speak. And when we turn the full 180 degrees, then only do we transcend time and space, because then only is ego eradicated.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Right.
Okay, Ted, you're up, buddy.
Okay, thank you, Marty. And Michael, thank you as always for joining us. It's just great to hear the many different ways questions can be answered. And so I'm going to preface my question.
I don't know many ways of answering. I give one answer. I give the same answer to every question. So that's all I know.
But the words all express it even more completely. I have a real brief question before I go into my scripted question here, following up on Mana. And I only ask it because it continues to eat away at me all these minutes since she posed the question about asking yourself, who am I? And finding that bliss emerges. I'm not there yet. I've been trying for a number of decades, but I'm not quite there yet. What comes is a short, welcome feeling of peace, perhaps. Marty talks this way too, and I'm happy for Marty and I'm happy for Mana that happens for them. And if and when it happens for me that my little moment of peace becomes bliss, I don't think I'm going to be too quick to abandon it by continuing with the self-examination. But I'll practice that after I get bored with peace a little bit. The question that came up when Mana was talking about this, you said that no, it's fine to enjoy the peace. These are my words, not yours. But the matter is, according to Ramana, to continue with your self-investigation, not to 179.5 degree about face, but to 180 degrees. And my question is, am I mistaken? I thought Ramana said, you can't eradicate ego totally until you're at your last breath. In other words, until you cross over the line. Is that somewhere else I might have picked up
that is not. No, you don't have to wait for the death of the body. Even now we can eradicate ego, because what is ego? Ego is nothing but a false awareness of ourself. We are aware of ourself as I am this body. That is what ego is. Since ego is a false awareness of ourself, it will be eradicated. It can be eradicated only by our being aware of ourselves as we actually are. We don't have to wait till the death of the body to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. If we have sufficient love, we can turn within here and now and eradicate ego here and now. See the case of Bhagavan, or that boy Venkataraman, who was there before Bhagavan, that if there was an ego there that was aware of itself as I am Venkataraman. That ego was obviously a very mature ego, because when that fear of death came, it immediately turned its attention within and was thereby eradicated. From what then remained is just pure awareness, just Brahman, nothing other than that. But in our view, that body then lived for another 54 years. It came to Tiruvannamalai, and through that body, so many these beautiful, clear, simple, deep teachings were given. But ego, there was absolutely no ego in that body at all. That is why whatever you call it, God or Brahman or Guru or whatever it was, shone through that body. Bhagavan often said, I am not this body. But because we take ourselves to be a body, Bhagavan seems to be a body. So the body of the jnani will continue in the view. The jnani means when ego is eradicated, what remains is jnani. The jnani is not a body, but in the view of those who are still in ajnana, the jnani seems to be a body. So in our view, Bhagavan lived for 54 years after ego was eradicated. So it's not necessary to wait till the death of the body. Here and now, if you really want to know and to be what you are, you can know and be that even now. Why we haven't yet eradicated ego is because we're not yet willing to surrender ourselves. We're not yet willing to let go of everything else. And without letting go of everything else and thereby surrendering ego is the price to be paid.
Thank you, Michael. You bring in an additional nuance that helps me to understand more clearly what you're saying. At first, I actually resonated with what I thought Ramana said. It must have been somebody else. You know, you listen, read, you talk, and you hear these things, and you're not quite sure of the source. I thought it resonated with me because I thought all material things, the universe on down, is ego. And certainly the body would be part of the material things. Certainly my last breath would be part of the material things. Hence, I would never find egolessness in this lifetime. But you're suggesting a way that
what Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, what does Bhagavan say? He says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. What does he mean when he says ego itself is everything? All phenomena are nothing but, that is, phenomena do not exist apart from our perception of them or apart from our awareness of them. The nature of it, there are two defining characteristics of ego. As ego, we are always aware of ourselves as a body. That is, we identify ourselves with the form of a body. And as I say, the body doesn't just mean the physical form, it means the form of 5 sheaths, as Bhagavan calls it. And whenever we're aware of ourselves as this form, everything else seems to be forms. That's what Bhagavan says in the 4th verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. If oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how to do so? Because that is, when we are a form, everything seems to be form. When we are formless, there is no forms to be seen. So all those, so the nature of ego is twofold. Firstly, to be aware of itself as a form, and consequently to be aware of other forms. Since all forms do not exist apart from our awareness of them, ego, that's why Bhagavan says ego itself is everything. That is, ego is the awareness that is aware of all these forms. The awareness of these forms is nothing but ego. But when we investigate ego, we're not investigating the awareness of the form, we're investigating the root, which is that basic awareness of our own existence, I am. That is the ego is that basic awareness I am plus adjuncts. All awareness of other things are adjuncts. So we're setting aside adjuncts in order to try to know that I am. So that is the sense in which Bhagavan says everything is ego. That doesn't mean we have to, so we don't have to wait for the body to die. The life and death of the body, they're just mental creations. In a dream, you don't have to wait for the death of the body before you wake up. As soon as you wake up, there's no longer that body or that world. So in effect, yes, the body is dead, but the body is dead because it was never there. It was just an imagination. Likewise, according to Bhagavan, this body is as much a mental creation as the dream body was.
Thank you, Michael.
But while we were experiencing that dream body as it seemed to be real. And consequently, the world seemed to be real. The dream world seemed to be real. But as soon as our identification with that dream body is severed, so as soon as we cease to identify that dream body as we're able to recognize, oh, it was all just a mental projection. It was a dream. Now we're experiencing this body as because I am real. If this body is then this body is real. So because we experience the body as the body seems to be real. And because the body seems to be real, and the body is a part of this universe, the whole universe seems to be real. That's how, well, it's our own reality we have projected outwards, and we see that everything else is real. Whatever we are currently experiencing seems to be real. But what is real is not what is experienced. It's not even the experiencer. It's the reality of the experiencer. That is the fundamental awareness I am. That alone is real. But as the experiencer, we take that I am as our own, and we take but this body is our own. And thereby we mix together the awareness and what is non-aware. That is what is called Chit-Jara Granti, but binds what is sentient with what is not sentient.
Thank you. I got a lot to chew on there.
Right.
I want to thank Mana for instigating this thought process, because
Right.
I questioned very much before I even heard your beginning of your answer to it.
Yeah.
When you got to that 180 degrees, I'm thinking, how can you see something that doesn't exist? And how can you continue to work on it? In fact, you said about 2 minutes ago, and this leads into my question that I prepared for today, when we are formless, there is no form to be seen.
Yeah.
And I like that. And that leads into my prepared question, which is in many respects a cliche. I'm sure it's been asked of you 100 times, and I'm sure it's been asked in general thousands of times, but I haven't heard an answer that's satisfactory yet. I've heard it said repeatedly, Michael, that there is no given reason for understanding why God or self or pure awareness or the I am created the idea for Maya to exist. Where did this dream come from? In other words, the appearance of the phenomenal world in which our illusory selves reside. Furthermore, it is my understanding that true self, as you just suggested, is not even aware of us, since the universe is merely a thought. In other words, it's unreal. And as you said, when we are formless, there is no form to be seen. So, question. Did Ramana ever deal with this question directly to your satisfaction? Why this dream at all, and where did it come from?
Okay. Firstly, you asked why did God or self or pure awareness create the idea of Maya and the appearance of this phenomenal world? In Advaita, there are different levels of explanation are given to suit people of different levels of spiritual maturity. If you read many of the older texts on Advaita, you'll find elaborate an elaborate metaphysical system of how Brahman became the jiva, and how the jiva were the 5 sheaves, and they're extremely complicated. I heard something recently. There's a text called Vedanta Sara, which is a sort of standard primer text in for anyone who begins to study Advaita in the traditional way. There it's explained that the subtle body has 17 parts. Those 17 parts are the 5 pranas, the 5 the 5 organs of action, the 5 sense organs, and the mind and the intellect. There are 17 parts. And then they go into elaborate explanations how those 17 parts came into existence and which parts are a reflection of the sattvic aspect and the tamasic aspect. Extremely complex explanations to explain how all this appeared. This is what is called, this is a form of what is called Shrishti Drishti Vada. Shrishti Drishti Vada means the common sense view, the so-called common sense view, which it's the one thing all materialists and religious people and most philosophers will agree with. First there's creation, then we see it. Whether you say the creation began with Genesis or with the Big Bang or whatever other explanation may be given, first there was creation, then only we are born into this creation and we see it. That is, so in Advaita has its own form of Drishti Shrishti Vada, a very complicated one based on Sankhya philosophy, based on other systems of Indian philosophy. But Advaita also offers, for people who are more mature, a much simpler and much more direct explanation, which is what Bhagavan taught us, which is what is called Drishti Shrishti Vada. According to Drishti Shrishti Vada, Drishti means seeing or perception, Shrishti means creation. So according to Drishti Shrishti Vada, there is no creation independent of our perception of it. In a dream, the dream world doesn't exist there, and then we come into a dream and see it. We don't travel off into, I think some theosophists or some people used to believe, they imagine, but in dream we travel, we go astral travel to another world, and we are in that dream world. But most of us don't believe that. Most of us accept the world is just the dream world is just a mental creation. So in a dream, as soon as we start dreaming, we experience ourselves as a body, and we experience a world there. That dream body and dream world have no existence whatsoever, independent of our perception of them. They are just our own imagination. So it's our perception. We bring them into seeming existence by seeing them. That is the cause of creation is perception. And the cause of perception is the perceiver. Who is the perceiver? It is ego. So this is what Bhagavan taught us. So this is why, as I said earlier, Bhagavan said, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. That's why Bhagavan said, when you're asleep, there is no world. So many people used to say, no, Bhagavan, though there's no world, though I'm not aware of the world when I'm asleep, there are other people who are awake who are aware of it. So how can you say it doesn't exist when I'm asleep? Bhagavan said, calling on the testimony of other people to prove the existence of the world in your sleep is like calling on the testimony of the person who is accused of a crime, calling on his testimony, and he will obviously testify, no, I'm innocent. I wasn't there. I didn't do that. So are we to believe him? Why is he in court? Because he's under suspicion. The evidence seemed to suggest that you committed this crime. So you have to prove that you didn't commit it. Just if you just say, no, I didn't commit it, it's of no value. Likewise, the other people who say that the world existed when you were asleep, those other people are part of the world whose existence is in question. So according to Bhagavan, this is something that many people will not be willing to accept. If they're not willing to accept, Advaita has lots of other explanations to suit them. But for those who want to go deep in Bhagavan's teachings, who want to put it deeply into practice, he's given the simplest and truest explanation, which is all this exists only because you see it. And you see it because you've risen as ego, and as soon as you identify as soon as you rise as ego, you grasp the form as I, and thereby you see all these other forms. So the world has not been created by God or by pure awareness or by self or anything. The world has been created by ego. Bhagavan said ego itself is Maya. There's no Maya independent of ego. So how did this ego or this Maya come into existence? That is where Bhagavan said that cannot be explained. Why can it not be explained? Because when you ask, how did this ego come into existence? That question is based on the assumption that the ego actually exists. But if you investigate this ego, you will see that there is no such thing as ego. There never was any such thing as ego. Since there never was any ego, there never was any world, there never was anything. So we cannot explain what doesn't actually exist. That's why Bhagavan gave a very novel explanation of the meaning of Maya. He said Maya means ya ma. Ya is a feminine form in Sanskrit. It's a feminine form of the pronoun what. And ma means not. So ya ma means what is not. Ego doesn't exist according to Bhagavan. It seems to exist, but in whose view does it seem to exist? Only in the view of this ego, who is itself Maya. But if we investigate this ego keenly enough, we'll see there's no such thing. Now if you're walking along a path in the dark and you see something lying on the path, you take it to be a snake. So long as you believe it's a snake, it causes all sorts of troubles. You're afraid of it. You're in a hurry to go somewhere. but because the snake is lying in the middle of a path, you're too afraid to go. So all sorts of problems are created by that snake. But if someone comes along and tells you, no, it's not a snake, it's a rope, you're still afraid, because to you, are you sure it's a rope? Are you sure it's not a snake? It looks to me like a snake. How will that other person convince you that it's only a rope? The only thing they can say is, look at it very carefully. If you look at it very carefully, what do you see? You see it's just a rope. When you see it's a rope, then you know there never was a snake there at all. Likewise, this ego seems to exist only so long as we don't look at it carefully enough. If we look at it carefully enough, we'll find there's no such thing, because what it actually is only pure awareness, which it means awareness that is never aware of anything other than itself. So for pure awareness, there is no Maya, there is no ego, there is no world. That's part of your question. The other thing is, you say, furthermore, my understanding is that the true self is not even aware of us, since the universe is merely a thought, unreal. That is true, but we need to understand it in a bit more deeply. That is, when we come to Bhagavan, that we see Bhagavan as a person. Bhagavan is not actually a person. He's not what he seems to be to us. Bhagavan is just that infinite space of pure awareness. But we see Bhagavan as a person. So through that person, whom we call Bhagavan or Ramana Maharshi or whatever, through that person, that divine light of pure awareness was shining. So we saw Bhagavan was so kind and so loving to all creatures. He didn't discriminate. He didn't favor the rich people or the poor people. He was equal to all. He didn't favor human beings over other animals. He was equally kind and gracious to other animals. His love was so much, but when he disturbed the nest of a hornet, accidentally, he allowed the hornets to sting his thigh because he had so much love for them, and he felt he had, very unintentionally, he had disturbed their nest. So let them, for their satisfaction, he let them sting his leg. So Bhagavan's love is equal to all, and it's unconditional, a total love he has for us. So how to understand Bhagavan's love? There's a beautiful, in the 5th verse of Aruṇācala Pañcaratnam, Bhagavan uses a beautiful term, Aniyamil Ambu. That means otherless love. So what he says in that verse is, those whose mind is surrendered to you, love you and love everything as your form with otherless love. So Bhagavan doesn't see us as other than himself. He sees us, but not as other than himself. So whereas we see ourselves as a person, he doesn't see us as a person. He sees us as himself. So he loves us as himself. He doesn't love us. He doesn't love us as the person we take ourselves to be. As a person, we're full of so many defects. We're totally unworthy of his love. But why he loves us so fully? Because he doesn't see us as this person. He sees us as we actually are, which is himself. So when we say that the true self is not even aware of the universe, yes, it is aware of the universe, but it's not aware of it as a universe. It's aware of it as itself. So it's not aware of the names and forms. It's aware of the substance. The substance is that pure awareness. So yes, Bhagavan did deal with this question directly, but his direct answer to it was, this is a question, this is an invalid question, because you cannot, what you're asking is how the ego came in. Everything else came into existence because ego came into existence. If you ask, why did ego come into existence? Ego is the cause of everything else. So since ego is the cause of everything else, there can be no cause of ego. And in the absence of ego, what exists is only pure awareness. Pure awareness doesn't cause anything. It just is as it is. So ego, there's no cause for ego. Why? But then how can there be something for which there's no cause? Bhagavan said, investigate and see whether it's there. If you investigate it, you'll find there's no such thing. So Bhagavan said, asking how the ego came into existence, or why the ego came into existence, is like asking how or why the son of a barren woman was born. There's no such thing as a son of a barren woman. If she's barren, she hasn't got any children. If she's got a son, she's not barren. So the son of a barren woman is often used in Advaita to talk when explaining that something that doesn't exist at all. Maya is the son of a barren woman. Ego is the son of a barren woman. It has no existence whatsoever. However, to us, we seem to be ego so long as we're looking away from ourselves. So what is the solution? Stop looking away from yourself. Look back at yourself. When you look back at yourself, if you look at yourself keenly enough, this ego will be just like if you look at the snake carefully enough, you'll see there's no snake at all. There's only a rope. If you look at this ego carefully enough, you'll see there's no ego. There's only pure awareness. So we cannot explain that which doesn't exist.
It is the hornet we must allow in order to have ourselves be stung into greater appreciation. I mean, that's
Yes.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's
Right.
it's challenging.
It is. Bhagavan's teachings are extremely easy to understand, but they're generally difficult for us to accept. But the more we go, the more we put them into practice, the more our mind is purified, the easier it will be for us to accept them, because we'll be less strongly attached to phenomena. That is, as our Vishaya vasanas become weaker, we'll be more willing to accept the truth of what Bhagavan said.
Thanks,
So
Michael.
what he said is, it's the simplest possible explanation. All this exists because you've risen as ego. Stop rising as ego and all problems are solved. He gives a very simplest of simple teachings.
Dependent on self-investigation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, Michael, the next question's for me.
Yes.
And when I read it now, I'm kind of wondering why I wrote it like this, but anyhow, this is how it goes. I sit here and I'm aware that I am. Who is aware of this awareness? And when I inquire, who am I, thoughts stop and I'm in a place of quietness. Is this the same awareness as I am?
Yes. That is, what is aware of I am is only I am. That is, in verse, I think it's 20, wait a second, in Upadēśa Undiyār, in verse 23 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Bhagavan says, because of the non-existence of any other awareness, to be aware of what exists is awareness. That is, what actually exists is awareness. So there's no awareness other than that to know that. So awareness and existence are not two different things. What is aware of I am is only I am. There are not two eyes there. One eye that exists and another eye that is aware that it exists. But it's only one eye. So it's, I am alone is aware that I am. And then he concludes that verse saying, awareness alone exists as we. That is, what we actually are is only that awareness, which is Uḷḷadu, what exists. So what is aware of awareness is only that same awareness, that pure, the fundamental awareness I am is the awareness of our own existence. What is aware of our own existence? Our existence alone is aware of our existence. That is, our existence means we alone are aware of our existence. So there are not two things there, there's only one thing. That's why it's called self-awareness. We are self-aware of ourselves. There's no other thing to be aware of us. And the self we are aware of is not something other than ourselves, it's we ourselves. So it's not, there's only one thing. Regarding the second part, when I inquire who are my thoughts stop, I'm in a place of quietness. Is this the same as the awareness I am? Yes. Yes, that is when inquire who am I doesn't mean asking the question. It means turning our attention back towards I am. The more our attention is fixed on I am, the more ego subsides and all other thoughts subside along with it. So we're in a place of quietness. That quietness is nothing but the natural silence of the pure awareness I am. So yes, it is the same as the awareness I am. Does that answer that part of your question adequately?
It does, except when I go into that place of silence, I don't seem to be aware of anything, and time will go by fast, and it's very much like sleep.
If you're aware of anything, that is your. There are two things there: you and what you're aware of. Though we talk about being aware of I am or being aware of ourself or I am is not an object. There's only one thing there, that is I am. So that is the pure, well, it's not exactly pure awareness, but it's coming close to pure awareness. It's mere awareness without being aware of anything, as we are in sleep. Correctly you say, yes, in sleep we are aware, but without being aware of anything.
Okay, and then a totally unrelated question I had is, and this kind of seems like it's, well, I'll just read it. In 40 Verses of Reality, verse 19, it talks about free will and karma. Please talk about this. Is one dominant? Do they co-dominate? Does either one really exist? And the part that applies to practice is it takes will on our part to practice. And so how does that fit in with karma or preordination?
Okay, good question, good question. What Bhagavan actually talks about there, he talks about fate and will. He doesn't actually use the term free will. That is, there's no adjective free there. However, it's what he says is, in the first sentence, he says, only for those who do not have discernment of the root of fate and will is there dispute about which prevails, fate or will. So when there's this, that it is age-old dispute has been there ever since the dawn of philosophy, ever since people started thinking, this has been a question: is everything predetermined, or do things happen according to our will? So this dispute is based on the assumption that the will is free, but we have freedom of will. However, this debate is, even now, it's raging in philosophy, in Western academic philosophy. You'll find often this question of free will, and it's also a question now. Science is trying to address this question, and neuroscientists think they'll be able to get to the bottom of this question of whether there's free will or not. However, the English term free will is a rather imprecise term, because if you ask people to define free will, they say, oh, it means you can do anything. If you've got free will, you can do what you want. But doing what you want is not freedom of will, it's freedom of action. We first need to distinguish, is our will free? Are we free to want what we want to want and to not want what we don't want to want? Bhagavan says, yes, your will is free. That is what he called Icha Swatantra, which means freedom of will. So are we then free to act? He said, yes, within limits, you do have freedom of action. So there's freedom of will, which he calls Icha Swatantra, and freedom of action, which he calls Kriya Swatantra. And he often talked about Icha Kriya Swatantra because the two go hand in hand. If there's no freedom of will, it's meaningless to talk about freedom of action. So but the terms Bhagavan used are more precise. So he talked about freedom of will and action. And he said, yes, we do have freedom of will and action. The whole law of karma is based upon the fact that we have freedom of will and action, because there are three kinds of karmas. That is how it's usually explained. That is, there's what is called agamya. That is the actions that we do driven by our will. So if we didn't have freedom of will and action, we couldn't do agamya. All the other two types of karma are sanchita, which is the store of the fruits of our past agamya karma, which we haven't yet experienced, and prarabdha, which is those fruits of past agamya, which we are now to experience. So both sanchita and prarabdha are based on the fact that we did agamya, which means actions done by our will. So there, according to Bhagavan, there is freedom of will and action. But there is also fate, because the prarabdha is what we are destined to experience in this lifetime. So there is both will and fate. So according to Bhagavan, this argument about which prevails, fate or will, arises only for those who don't understand what is the root of fate and will. That is, the root of fate and will is only ego, because it's as ego, but I want this, I don't want that. That is the ego. The will is ego's will. And because ego acts according to its will, it thereby accumulates fruit, which it then experiences as fate. So fate is what is predetermined. That is the selection of the fruits of our past actions. So ego is the one who acts according to its will and consequently experiences the fruit of its past actions. So fate and will both exist so long as there is ego. But then in the next sentence he says, those who have known themselves, who is the one origin of fate and will, have discarded them. But as I say, the origin or root of fate and will is ego. When he said those who have known themselves, he means those who have known the truth of themselves. That is, ego is the root or origin of fate and will. When we investigate ourselves, we know the truth of this ego. That's what he means by knowing themselves. When we know the truth of ego, we find there's no such thing as ego at all. Therefore, there is no will and no fate. So he said, those who have known themselves, who is the one origin for fate and will, have discarded them. Because when we know ourselves, ego is eradicated, and therefore fate and will go along with it. And then he concludes saying, will they thereafter be associated with them? That is, our connection with fate and will is only ego. When we eradicate ego by knowing ourselves, we will never again be associated with will or fate. So the answer to your question is one dominant. Each dominates in its own sphere. That is, what you are to experience is the domain of fate. A will cannot change fate, as Bhagavan said in the reply he gave to his mother when she asked him to come back to Madurai. He wrote a note in which he said, according to the prarabdha of each one, he who is for that means God, being there, that implies being in the heart of each of them, will make them dance. That is, a certain fate has been allotted for us. There are certain things that we are destined to experience in this life. We cannot avoid experiencing those things. In order to experience those things, certain actions have to be done by our body, speech, and mind. A simple example is, supposing you're destined to be a doctor. You can't become a doctor without studying and passing the exams. And so you will be made, your body, speech, and mind will be made to study and will be made to sit those exams and pass them, because it's your destiny to be a doctor. That's just one simple example. So whatever we are to experience, from the major things like our career down to the smallest things, if you're destined to, if you're feeling thirsty, if you're destined to get a cup of water to quench your thirst, you will be given that cup of water and you will drink it. So the action of drinking the water is necessary in order for you to have your thirst quenched, which is your destiny. So a lot of the actions of our body, speech, and mind are driven by destiny. However, that doesn't mean all actions of body, speech, and mind are driven by destiny, because our will is also interfering. For example, supposing it's your destiny to be a doctor, your destiny, you will be made to study and to pass the exams. But most people who become doctors also want to become doctors for one reason or another. They may want to become doctors because they want to help people to relieve the sick, or they may want to become doctor because they can earn a lot of money being a doctor. Whatever their motivation, most people who become doctors want to be doctors. So a lot of the things we experience in life are things we want to experience. So the actions we do to experience them are not only driven by fate, they're also driven by our will. There are also things we want to experience, but we're not destined to experience. We can try to experience those things, but we cannot change what is destined to happen. That's why in the next two sentences of that note, Bhagavan said, what is never to happen will not happen, whatever amount of effort you make. What is to happen will not stop, whatever amount of obstacle you make. This is certain. Therefore, being silent is best. Or being silent is good. He doesn't even say best. He said being silent is good. That is the only good option, is just to be silent. What does he mean by being silent? He doesn't mean you remain without actions of body, speech, and mind, because whatever actions your body, speech, and mind are destined to do, they'll be made to do. What he means is we should stop, we should refrain from rising as ego, because when we rise as ego has vasanas. It has likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. So long as we rise as ego, to a greater or lesser extent, our actions will be driven by our will. We will act according to our will. And those actions are agamya. The more we curb our vishaya vasanas, the less we will be creating, we will be doing agamya, but we'll still be doing it to some extent until the root of both fate and will is eradicated. That is ego. So the domain of destiny or fate is what we are to experience. In that domain, fate alone prevails. That is the will. If we are destined to experience something, however much we don't want to experience it, however much we try to avoid experiencing it, it's destined for us to experience it, we will experience it. So in the domain of experience, fate dominates. But whatever be our fate, cannot change what we want to experience. It may not be my destiny to become president of the United States. That doesn't stop me wanting to be president of the United States. So I can want to, and I can try to as much as I like, but it's not going to happen because it's not my fate. So we have they're two separate domains. In the domain of fate, that in the domain of experience, fate alone prevails. In the domain of what we want to experience, our will alone prevails. So neither prevails over the other because they each have two separate domains. Do the courts in the UK dominate over the courts in the US, or do the courts in the US dominate over the courts in the UK? In their own domain, if you're in the UK, the courts in the UK dominate. I mean, they prevail. If you're in the US, the courts in the US prevail. Neither can prevail over the other because they're two different jurisdictions. Likewise, fate and will are two entirely separate jurisdictions. So neither prevails over the other. Each prevails in its own domain. So you say, do they co-dominate? They each dominate in their own domain, not exactly co-dominate. And then your final question is, does either one really exist? No. Simple answer, because so long as ego exists, they exist. And so long as we rise as ego, we have likes, dislikes. No one can deny, but they have desires, attachments, likes, dislikes. We all know we have a will. We also know that things happen not according to our will always. We have to experience what we have to experience. So they both seem very real, so long as we rise as ego. But when we investigate this ego and find there's no ego, as Bhagavan said, they will depart, they will cease to exist, because they don't exist even now.
Well, that all sounds perfectly logical the way you explain it. And if you wanted to run for president of the United States, maybe we could work out this court thing between England and the US too. It might be interesting.
Yeah. Well, since we've left the US now, so we just have to become the 53rd state or whatever. I don't. It would be. I'm sure Boris Johnson will cooperate. He certainly would have cooperated if Trump had remained. I don't know how he'll get on with Biden.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, moving into something more interesting than politics. We have
the soap opera of life.
So Kaiser from Minnesota has a question for you, Michael. Kaiser, would you please ask your question?
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
My name is Kaiser. Everyone here okay?
Yep. We're hearing you.
I want to apologize before I ask my question because I don't want to insert me into these questions, but it's just so clumsy for me. So I apologize if it sounds like I take contrary, because I don't mean to.
No, that's fine. That's fine. No problem.
My question is simple, and I try to make it as simple as possible. You have snake and rope.
Yes.
Yes. And then you have self-inquiry. My main question is the self-inquiry, because self-inquiry, as I hear it, is to turn around and look inside.
I don't think so.
And to turn around and look inside, the experience of turning around and look inside is either A, my ego says, no, this, I want bliss, something better, no. And then look, and that doesn't taste right. The other thing is turn around and look inside. It's not turn around and look inside. And excuse me, I'd try to ask the question. It's not turn around and look inside. When it gets close to that, it's here. It's not turning around and look inside. It's not bliss. And I don't mean to say that I am right. I don't mean that. I don't mean that.
No.
But it seems snake and rope, and difficulty with turning around and look inside. Difficulty turning around and seeing what it's look at snake and rope. I'm confused, and I don't want to say that I know. I'm confused.
Okay, no, it's a good question you asked. That is, no words are adequate to explain this. Because now we are looking at things other than ourselves, in effect, we are looking away from ourselves at other things. Now we need to look back. Instead of looking at other things, we need to look back at ourselves. This is what is called turning. Bhagavan often uses the term turning. It's not a perfect term, because, I mean, no description can be perfect, because it is beyond words. As you say, when you look at the snake, you're not actually turning to look at it. You're just looking at it more carefully. So we are just trying to look at ourselves more carefully. So there are different ways of explaining it. Different explanations are useful for different purposes. The reason this term turning is often used by Bhagavan, because now, figuratively speaking, we're turned outwards, looking at things other than ourselves. So long as we're looking at things other than ourselves, we're looking away from ourselves. Of course, these things other than ourselves are nothing but ourselves. I mean, there is nothing other than ourselves, but they seem to be other. So long as they seem to be other, we seem to be looking away from ourselves. We need to look back at ourselves. That is what it meant by turning.
Okay, thank you.
But-
I
but-
seem to
but-
need
but-
to.
With all these things, we shouldn't just take the words at face value. We've got to, the words are all pointers. We follow where they're pointing. And when we try to put it into practice, the meaning of the words become clearer, and why it's expressed in such a way becomes clearer. So the real, it's useful asking questions because we need to understand this clearly. But the amount of clarity we can get by asking questions or by thinking about this thing is limited. The real clarity comes when we put it into practice. The more we put it into practice, the deeper we go within, the clearer it will become.
Thank you. I want to do it as suggested. I want to not do it like my way.
Yeah.
I don't want to do it my way. It seems to look at snake and rope is what is the turning away. Like,
Yeah.
What is my life? What am I seeing? And look further and further, and then the outside becomes inside. I don't know if that's the correct way, but that's what happens when I try to play with these.
Bhagavan called this vichara, investigation. So in an investigation, to understand the words, we have to try to put them into practice. We may not do it perfectly at first, but so a certain amount of trial and error is there. When you want to learn to ride a bicycle, you can understand the theory, you've got to balance, but how to balance, you can learn only by trial and error. Somehow or other, when we start, we fall off so many times, but somehow or other, along the way, we slowly gain the knack of it. And once we've gained the knack of it, it's the easiest thing in the world is to get on a bicycle and balance. We don't have any difficulty at all. So we've got to get the knack of this. To get the knack of it, we've got to do some trial and error. But it's very helpful to read Bhagavan's teachings, to think about how he's expressed it. Because in the way he's expressed it, those words are very good clues, very good pointers. But merely reading the words is of no use. Bhagavan said, the practice is the most important thing. The words are only to help us, push us in the right direction.
Thank you for including me. I have a place to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No. I mean, this is a path of, no one else can follow this path for you. No one else can tell you how you should follow this path. We each have to investigate ourselves. So Bhagavan's path is a path for people who are ready to think deeply, and people who want to assert their particular beliefs. It's not for them, but it's for people who are independently minded, people who are ready to question everything. Bhagavan's path, in certain respects, Bhagavan's path is the very opposite of religion, because in religion, you're told you must have faith. Bhagavan says, don't believe anything that you do not know. The only thing we actually know is I am. Everything else is belief. So Bhagavan said, you need to doubt everything, but first and foremost, doubt the doubter. Doubt, who is this ego who is doubting all other things? So Bhagavan takes skepticism or doubt to the very, to its logical extreme. That we doubt even this I that is now rising to doubt other things. Before we can know about anything else, we first need to know what we are. We are the knower of all other things. So without knowing the truth of the knower, we cannot know the truth of what is known. So we need to doubt the the reality of that which is knowing all this. Of course, I am is certain, but now we're not aware of ourselves as I am. We're aware of ourselves as I am Kaiser, I am Michael, or I'm whoever. So we need to doubt that. Am I really Kaiser? Am I this body that I seem to be? So we need to have a deeply questioning mind, deeply inquiring mind, deeply I mean, we need to go deep into this, but we shouldn't be just looking for verbal answers or mental answers to our questions. We need to actually experience what we are. For that, we need to investigate ourselves. We need to turn within. So those of us who are deeply curious and really want to know and are really ready to question everything and to reject all beliefs which lack sufficient foundation. There's so many things we believe. We believe we're this body, we believe this world is real, all these things. But actually, when we think deeply about it, none of these beliefs have any foundation. Right.
That's all the questions we have right now, but we have a few minutes left. So if anybody out here in the audience would like to ask Michael a question, please.
Can I have a follow-up question, please?
Sure, come on in, Savita.
Okay. Hi, Michael, everybody. Hi. So the question got prompted with this whole interaction and dialoguing around the ego and turning around and looking at it, and you, Michael, saying at night when we go into deep sleep, the ego goes away and we basically don't exist in that sense. So what I'm curious about, how could one use that knowledge for meditation? Because at night, the ego doesn't question that of its own disappearance. It goes to sleep, it doesn't think about it. But when you do this in meditation, looking at the ego to see its non-existence, there's a lot of rebelliousness to that. And it doesn't actually surrender at all.
Yes.
Whereas at night, it doesn't question its own disappearance.
Yes, right. Good question. That is, when we rise as ego, we see so many other things. All these other things, this is our own dream. So all these things are created by us. So projecting and perceiving all these things requires energy. So after 16 hours or so of waking state or dream state, we get tired. Because we are too tired to continue projecting, we cease projecting. As soon as we cease projecting, ego subsides back into its source. And what then remains is just the pure awareness that we actually are. However, that pure awareness doesn't destroy ego. Why? Because the pure awareness shines forth only after the ego has disappeared. Ego subsides, what remains is pure awareness. When we are investigating ourselves, we are trying to eradicate ego. In order to eradicate ego, we as ego need to experience that pure awareness. But as soon as ego experiences pure awareness, it is thereby eradicated. In the case of sleep, or any other state of manolaya, any other state of temporary dissolution of mind, ego subsides first, and pure awareness is what remains. In self-investigation, we as ego are trying to experience that pure self-awareness. When ego sees itself as pure awareness, it ceases to be ego. Does that answer your question at all?
So what I hear you say is then the ego needs to actually consciously, if we can use that word, have a taste of pure awareness.
Yes.
Before it can subside. And in sleep, it's the other way around. The ego gets quiet and then pure awareness naturally arises.
Yes. Well, pure
that
awareness
makes sense.
is what remains. Yes.
Right,
So,
what remains, right.
We don't fear.
But there's also no one aware of it.
There's no
in
one.
sleep, there's really no one aware of it.
There's no ego aware of it. But when we wake up from sleep, we clearly know I was asleep. Because as ego, we know as ego, we identify ourselves with this body. Not only do we identify ourselves with this body, we also identify ourselves with I am, the fundamental awareness.
Right.
So ego is neither the fundamental awareness I am, nor is it this body. It's a spurious entity that takes both together, combines the two together as if they were one. So we have no problem about falling asleep, because when we're tired, sleep overcomes us. We don't feel threatened because we know very well it's only a temporary state, and we'll rise up again the next morning. So we've got no fear. When we try to turn within, turn back towards ourselves, the very existence of ourself as ego is threatened, because if we see what we actually are, ego will be eradicated forever. That is why there's so much resistance. When we turn within, we keep on trying to grasp other things. Or if we're not able to grasp other things, we fall asleep. Sometimes that happens. I mean, sometimes it is compared to, the state of self-attentiveness is compared to a balancing act, where we are trying to avoid two things. We're trying to avoid succumbing to thoughts, and we are also trying to avoid succumbing to sleep or manolaya. We're trying to remain balanced between the two, to have the attentiveness of a waking state without the thoughts of a waking state.
So then, really, the ego then knows somewhere deep inside, hidden from me, of its own non-existence. Otherwise, it wouldn't have all the fear. Looking at the self.
Yes. We seem to be ego only so long as we're looking at other things. If we look back at ourselves, has anyone ever seen the ego? When people used to ask, like Ted was asking, how did this ego come into existence? Bhagavan said, first find this ego. If you bring this ego to me, then we can find out how it came into existence. If you look for this ego, you don't find anything, because there is no such thing actually.
So when we go further with this, I would assume, though, that the ego then has some kind, even without, let's say, having understanding of the teaching, the ego has some kind of a sense that it comes out of pure self. And it doesn't want to lose its identification back into the pure self, because that is where it came from. So somewhere in there, even though I'm not aware of that, it knows that it comes out of the self.
Yes.
Okay.
Even when we're aware, ego is that false awareness that is aware of itself as I am this body, I am this person. I'm Savita. Even when you're aware I am Savita, are you not aware I am? So the awareness of our own reality is always there. It just happens to be seemingly obscured by being aware. Instead of being aware of ourselves just as I am, we're aware of ourselves as I am Savita, I am Michael, or I am whoever.
Right, so it seems more merged almost, as opposed to obscured.
Yes.
Okay, so really the looking toward ego is to in a way to separate it from it.
Yes. Because ego comes into existence by grasping form, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. That means it's always attending to things other than itself. When we turn our attention back towards ego, we are thereby letting go of other things. That is where the ego is reluctant to let go of other things, because we stand as ego only by holding those other things. So it's our lack of willingness to let go of other things, but make it seem this is difficult, this is a struggle.
That's good explanation. Yeah, I get that now. Not that I have that experience, but yeah, that is the distinction between the sleep part, because I always struggled with that, and the looking at ego part, right?
It's not entirely true to say you don't have if you've tried to put this into practice at all, you do have at least an inkling of that experience. That is
right, but I don't have the clear definition yet.
Yeah, but that clarity comes with practice. Clarity comes with practice.
Right. Mostly I bump up into the resistance of ego wanting to look at itself. That's why I was curious about the sleep thing, because there you don't seem to bump up into that at all.
No, because ego hides itself. Ego there's no ego at all in sleep, but in effect, we can say ego is hidden in sleep. So though the pure awareness is shining, because ego is hidden under its blanket, it's not affected by the pure awareness. Whereas in self-attentiveness, ego is naked. It's facing the pure awareness in its state of nakedness, and therefore it cannot stand, and therefore it gets swallowed by that pure awareness.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very good explanation. Thank you.
Okay.
Michael, thank you so much for being here with us. It's just really a privilege to have you, and a joy, and just I'm really happy you could do this. And
it's a privilege for me to talk with you, because I just love talking about Bhagavan's teaching. So it's and this, by talking about this thing, it's constantly reminding me of what I should be doing.
Let me just say one thing. Michael, thank you so much for the Jayanti dissertation that you provided yesterday. What?
Yeah.
For those who wants to see Michael's bhakti side, I highly recommend you look him up on YouTube. Thank you so much for that. That was so good.
What else have we been talking about today except bhakti?
Bhakti, yes. Sure.
When we talk about Bhagavan's teaching, why are we talking about Bhagavan's teachings? Because we love his teachings. So Bhagavan's path is a path of pure bhakti. We can't get away from bhakti.